Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And oh boy, do I have a wonderful story behind today's book because it is written by Christa Carmen, and she is an award winning author. Oh, look how young she is. Oh, it's so beautiful. Krista.
Thank you. Thank you
Oh,
so much for having me.
this is a thrill for me. I love this book. I love this book. I've got it, and I've got it all. I've got markers in every page that I love. Little
Thank
things.
you.
There's a dozen. Yeah, I think there's a dozen little things there that pages that I had to go back and look at again because beautiful writing. Beautiful
Oh,
writing.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, Beneath the Poet's House. When I got it, when first the publicist sent me, do you want to interview somebody who's written about Edgar Allen Poe? I said, oh my gosh, it's like a dream come true. I've been Poe fanatic since I was little. And then, whoa, I got this book and I didn't know quite what to expect. And then I discovered shades of, I don't know, shades of a lot of great Gothic writers. And then shades of Stephen King. At one point, I'm like, oh my gosh, Stephen King, step aside. We've got to do great.
Gosh, thank you. I so appreciate that. I'm glad that you tried to do a little bit of a different take on Edgar Allan Poe, coming from a different angle.
Yes, and this is so fascinating, and it's from an angle that nobody you really knows this story, and it's fascinating. I just want to show before we start. I want to show a few little. I love blurbs, and when you get wonderful blurbs, I think it's so nice. You've already received so much praise for Beneath the Poet's House, and of course, it's right away that you are an award-winning Bram Stoker award-winning author. That we'll talk about that a lot. But you definitely weave a captivating web of psychological suspense. And boy, for
Thank
Gothic
you.
mystery fans, this is a treat, and it really is a treat. And there's just so many wonderful. I think you have 3 pages of blurbs at the beginning of your book, which is okay. Blurb page, blurb. Well, let's get to the book. But it is really great, and there's just so many things I love about this book. So you tell this story because it's so intriguing. How did you discover this and set the stage? And I love also the name of your main character. I love when somebody comes up with a name that I haven't seen very often. Now
Thank
I
you.
live in England and go to Ireland quite a bit, so I've seen the name before. But tell us about this wonderful story.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love writing things set in Rhode Island, and I love writing things with a sort of gothic bent, and I also love writing things that have, I don't write historical fiction, but I love writing things that have a connection to something from the past, whether it's the setting. For Daughters of Block Island, I set the novel at Whitehall, which was a mansion that did exist at one point on Block Island, and it really helped ground the story for me, and it gave me sort of just a really nice springboard from which to let the story go off in all sorts of different directions. So when I was getting ready to write my second novel, I I'm trying really I've because I had the launch event for this book last night, and I was asked a question a little bit similar, like where did the jumping off point come for it? And I can't remember what the first thing was, but there was something that made me go to Providence because I did know a little bit about Sarah Helen Whitman, and obviously I knew about Edgar Allan Poe, and I knew that he had spent some time in Providence. So I kind of had an idea that I wanted to do something maybe with Poe and Whitman, maybe a modern day haunting based on their relationship. And then I went up to Providence. I live in Westerly, so I live in the southern part of Rhode Island. So I took the little hour-long jaunt up to Providence with some writer friends, and we did a little literary afternoon, and we spent some time at the Providence Athenaeum, which played a big part in the courtship of Edgar Allan Poe and Sarah Helen Whitman. And then we walked down Benefit Street, And there's Brown's campus, and there's a really cute coffee shop that's got very cool architecture. And then there's the Shunned House, which inspired H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Shunned House. That's at 135 Benefit Street. And then we made our way to 88 Benefit Street, and the cathedral and the cemetery behind her, what was Sarah Whitman's residence. And I just instantly was like, here is the story. This setting is just, it's just really magical isn't the right word. Haunting is the right word, but like in a good way, not in a creepy way, but it just, there's something about being on Benefit Street and knowing that Edgar Allan Poe first saw Sarah Helen Whitman tending to her rose garden at midnight while he was walking down the street in Providence with a poet friend of his. And he, as he tells it, as he told it, fell madly in love with her right then and there. And then they eventually started corresponding, and a lot of their relationship took place. They spent time in cemeteries because Sarah Whitman's mother didn't approve of Poe. So there's several cemeteries. The other cemeteries didn't factor so much into my book. I had to narrow things down a little bit, but a lot of their relationship took place at the Athenaeum, like within the stacks of this beautiful academic library. And so you can sit in an alcove at the Athenaeum and imagine Sarah Helen Whitman waiting to talk to Poe about their planned Christmas wedding, because after they'd corresponded for several months, they planned to be married. And his only requirement for her to marry him was to stay sober. And she was told while at the Athenaeum that he had drank that morning, and she ran down the street from the Athenaeum back to her house on Benefit Street and pressed a ether-soaked rag to her face and collapsed from the betrayal of her beloved. And their romantic relationship ended. It's just very interesting. I think I touch on this a little bit in the afterword of the book, but even though they broke up and were not married, Sarah Helen Whitman became a huge defendant of Poe after his death and really helped clear up a lot of misconceptions about him that had been started because a literary rival ended up writing his obituary and just slamming him and inventing some of the narrative that we think we know about Poe today, like he was a laudanum addict. There wasn't really a lot of evidence for that to be true. And Sarah Helen Whitman was the person who helped clear up a lot of those misconceptions. But anyway, so getting back to why I wrote the book, just knowing what had happened between the two of them and standing in the places where it had happened, I thought, how could I not write something that is inspired by the energy that you can still feel in this place?
It is. It is really magical. In a way, gee, it's so exciting to think of it. I always love to see the genesis of how a story starts, but when you walk into an atmosphere like that, everything's there, everything you need. Just grab it, run with it, and you certainly did.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun to write this book. It didn't give me any problems. It was like the story just poured right out of me.
And exactly, and I think the reader will feel it. It keeps rolling along, it moves, which is wonderful in a novel where you just keep us the surprises, the unexpectedness of some of the events just are thrilling. And then of course your main character who gets involved, who decides to move into this house. Lay
Yes.
out that story. So that was a great vehicle there. How you brought her to this point where she's living in the house. It excites me. I've gone back, as I said, I've marked out my favorite parts in the book, and I go back and oh, how did she write that? How did she write that? It's really fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's so strange because like for the Daughters of Black Island, I remember creating my main characters, and I remember like why I came up with each of them and where they came from. And I wrote Beneath the Poet's House more recently than I wrote Daughters of Black Island. The Daughters of Black Island was my debut, and I wrote Daughters of Black Island in 2020 and 2021. Or I guess 2021. Yeah. And I wrote Beneath the Poet's House in 2022. So it's more recent, but I cannot remember. It's almost like Saoirse and her three friends and Emmett, they all just jumped into my head. I did start with Saoirse. The first character I had was Saoirse, and this is not a spoiler, I don't want to worry anyone, because she does move to Providence because her husband has died. And the first scene that I ever wrote for the book, I do remember this, was Saoirse finding her husband's body. And and I won't say too much more about that
No,
because
yeah, don't give that away because
yeah,
that plays that scene. Oh, it plays into it. It really does. It's very important.
yes. So I will just say then, so I don't, yeah, like we said, don't spoil it. But when you first, at least for me, I don't know, I'm sure every novelist is different. Maybe sometimes some people start a novel and they're gonna stick with it no matter what. I think for me, sometimes I still can potentially start a project, even with as rich of an idea as the whole Poe Whitman backstory that I wanted to weave in. I still could potentially start a project and then decide I thought there was something here and there really wasn't. But once I wrote that first scene with Saoirse, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to follow her. We're going to follow Saoirse. We're going to see where this goes. So she definitely carried everything that came afterwards. I think she's maybe my favorite main character that I've written in the two novels that have been published. And then I have a novel coming out next year as well. Yeah, something about her, she's just very strong, and even though she has some bull characteristics, I find her to be very likable, and I wrote her, so I mean, this is maybe a weird thing to say, but like I was very much rooting for her throughout the whole book and like hoping that I didn't write myself into a place where something less than ideal was going to happen to her.
She's great, and I want to just tell people when they start the book, she has a strange spelling for the name, and it's Saoirse, Saoirse, and at first you look at it and what is I of course I recognized it as Irish right away, and it's pronounced sur-shuh, which is
Yes.
really pretty. So
Yeah, thank
where'd
you.
that name come from?
I
Where
don't know.
where do these things come from?
I do know this is not really spoiling anything, and it's not very subtle. This was just me. Sometimes I just want to lean in hard to the Gothic trappings and play with stuff, and I think sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of a review here and there, and readers are like, that wasn't very subtle. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes you just gotta lean into things. So I was looking for, so Saoirse White has the same initials as Sarah Whitman. So I was looking for an S name, and it was hard to find an S name that wasn't super common because I felt like if it was a common S name, even if it wasn't like Sarah Samantha, then it would almost be too obvious. But I felt like if it was Saoirse and it was such a strange name, then the reader wouldn't necessarily notice the initials being the same for the two characters.
And it works. It really works. It's fine. Funny at by the end, people will always remember Saoirse now. So
Yeah.
I, I'm waiting to see who's going to name their baby Saoirse.
That would be very cool. It's a beautiful name.
If anybody names their baby Saoirse, I think you can send them a free copy of an autographed copy of the book. How about that?
I think that's totally fair.
I,
Totally fair.
a great advertisement for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Some girl named Saoirse will have to say, "Ha ha! My name comes from this wonderful, brilliant book written
Yes.
by Christa Carmen." And
Yes, my mother loved this book, and so she named me after the main character.
oh, it's romantic. It's romantic. I think it's great. I love the idea. All of the things. That's great because then a baby named that today will be carrying it for the next 100 years. It's like a living advertisement for this wonderful book.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's such a cool way to think about it. I love that. And I
And
think unique and like older fashioned names are coming back into style these days.
yes, people like unusual names, and I think you're going to have a walking billboard. Whoever, that's what you
Love
need
it.
because you need to keep promoting books all the time.
I know. It's always nice when something stays in the public conscious for a little bit.
Exactly. Of course, you have a great name to remember too, Christa Carmen. I don't know if it's your real
Well,
name,
thank
but
you.
it's great. It's a great name.
It's a pen name, but it comes from a family name, so
It's a great
sort
name.
of the real deal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But so, did you have fun at your launch party yesterday? What was it?
Oh, yes, it was wonderful. It was held locally to where I'm from, so it was so nice because obviously people from my day job and family and friends, very long time friends and readers and writer friends. I just had such a lovely turnout, and it was a very much like today and tonight. It was a very dark and stormy night and not very nice weather. So I was extra grateful for people to leave their warm homes and cozy hearths and come out and see me. But yeah, it was lovely. We had Edgar Allan Poe themed cookies. It was very fun.
So now that you've had the launch and you've spoken to your first audience, what is the story that you give to people? How much of the story? Because I don't like spoilers, but what do you want to tell people about what happens in this story and some of the characters, other characters that you brought in? Because a great bunch of characters.
Thank you. Yeah, I usually describe the book as saying it's about a writer. She was a writer. She's not doing much writing at the time, but Saoirse White moves to Providence to a house that was the one-time home of Sarah Helen Whitman in the wake of her husband's death, and she meets the a trio of transcendentalist writers that introduce her to the person of Sarah Helen Whitman, in that they teach her that she used to live in her house and how she was a poet and a critic, and they give her the 411 about Sarah Helen Whitman. And the more she learns about Sarah Helen Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe, the more she realizes that events in her own life are strangely mirroring Sarah Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe's relationship. I can also just say that she meets another writer that she begins a romantic relationship with, Emmett Powell, and things just take a turn for the strange and unusual, much like a Poe story.
Yeah, exactly. Strange and unusual. Now, what did you know about transcendentalism? Oh, I can't say.
I know, right? It's a mouthful. Transcendentalism. Not much. When I remembered a lot from, I was an English major in college, and most of what I remembered from transcendentalism was from like Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, just the sort of more academic. But it was very interesting. I reread Walden and some of the quintessential texts. Yeah, it was actually surprising to me that more people aren't into transcendentalism these days, especially in this sort of wild, crazy society that we're in with social media and capitalism. And just, I don't know, it's just, well, the more I learned about the movement, I feel like there are a lot of people that love a lot of what transcendentalism stands for, and they just like maybe don't know that it's a thing. Yeah, it was fun doing that research.
Yeah, and you blend it in so nicely, and of
Thank
course,
you.
these three these three people each have such distinct personalities, and their idea conjuring up some of the things from Poe that was really great.
Thank you. Yes, I had a lot of fun with those three characters. I try. It's fun to me when quote unquote secondary characters, I mean, I do feel like they were very important to the story, but I love when the sort of sidekick characters are just as fleshed out. I mean, it's hard too because you also have to write in service of the story. So you can't have all these asides about the backstory of your side characters because readers are going to be like, this doesn't matter to the plot the way it does with a main character. Excuse me. So you have to more seamlessly weave those things in.
But they can add that extra dimension and the depth. And it's the old Hollywood movies have all of these little characters. It might just be the porter at the train station. It might be the taxi driver. It might be the maid, but they all add that little depth. They don't have big speaking parts, but it's a combination of how they talk and what they say in a moment that's why we can watch all of these old movies so many times. You can watch some of the old 30s and 40s movies over and over because it's always you forget like what a minor character said, and it's always refreshing, and that's what happens when you
Yes.
write good minor characters.
Thank you. Yeah, it adds some color to the story, and yeah, I love old movies. I mean, they're not quite as not 30s and 40s, but I'm a huge Hitchcock fan. I love when every piece of the story has a, it all everything actually fits into the, you know, the
It
end
all there's a
result.
payoff. There's a payoff at the end.
Yes.
Oh, and there's a payoff in this
Yes.
book at the end. Absolutely stunned me. It really did stun
Oh,
me. I was
thank
so
you.
happy when a book really makes me sit up and say, "Woo, this is great," because there are so many books that are derivative. This is not derivative. This is original. Oh,
Thank you.
this was not written by AI. This is
Oh, that means a lot, so much because and it's funny. I read a lot of, not that I want to call anything derivative, but it's funny because I'm perfectly fine. Like there's a place for kind of cookie cutter thriller, like sometimes almost like a beach read. That's like a nicer way to put it. There's definitely a place for those books. Like I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and it's hard to like you can't read a beautifully wrought literary masterpiece on Audible because you're going to miss a lot of things. I like to read like fast paced, no brainer, you can just follow the plot simply. I like to read a lot of those books, but I can't write them. Like I've tried to write twisty, plot driven as opposed to character driven, things where the setting doesn't necessarily matter. It's like a domestic thriller where it's more about the relationships. And it's not appealing to me to sit with a project for from start to finish. You're working on a book for a year. It takes me 4 months to write the first draft and then a couple months to edit and have beta readers, and my agent takes a peek and then it goes to editing. It has to be, one of the things I always say is if something is boring, I tend to have a pretty good people usually say, "Oh, your book moved along and it didn't bore me at all." And I'm like, "Thank God," because that's the way I gauge things. If something is boring for me to write, I just stop writing and I'm like, this scene doesn't have to be in there because if it's boring me, nobody's going to want to read it. So I try really hard to make things different and interesting all the way through. And I think that's why I like, some people might call it cheating a little bit, to pluck from the past and write something that Edgar Allan Poe and Sarah Helen Whitman, they're not really characters in this book, but yet they are. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's why I like pulling from the past because it adds that extra layer for me that just makes it so enjoyable to immerse myself in the world while I'm writing the book.
You definitely don't have a boring middle. There's no.
Oh, thank you.
Definitely not. As a matter of fact, in some places in the middle, it's that's. I think that's where I started saying Stephen King. So,
I'm a big fan of Stephen King, so I always appreciate that.
of course, now being a gothic horror, how did you get involved? It's funny. I had my best friend in high school was had hair like yours, black
Oh,
hair, long, and she was like the first before Gothic was Gothic, before anybody knew about Gothic or ever thought about it. She was Gothic. It was funny. In
what?
12th grade, she turned Gothic. And I thought, is it her hair? Why am I looking so? I'm not, there's nothing Gothic about me. But she just took on this persona. And I don't know. So, were you always in love with Gothic?
Yeah, I mean, there's just something about that aesthetic to me. And it's so funny that you said that because I just had a flashback. And this is probably such an embarrassing story, but I'm going to share it anyway because I'm just such a dork. But prior to my launch event last night, I actually had a soft launch for the book because I got invited to be a guest at an author expo in Rhode Island over the weekend. And it was a Saturday, so I was like, oh, I should probably just wear like pants and a shirt. It's like a day event. Like maybe it'll be weird to wear like a fancy dress and earrings. And I was like, no, you know what? It's the first time that I'm going to be selling and signing the new book. And I had this dress, and off of me, like on the hanger, it looked a little gothic, but not overwhelmingly. But then I put it on and I was like getting a little more gothic vibes. And I was like, I really like this dress. I'm going to wear this to the event. It's going to be perfect. And then at one point, we actually sold out of The Daughters of Black Island, and I had some more copies in my car, and I went running out to my car. And so I'm running in this billowy sleeves, billowy length dress, and my hair is flying behind me. And I was like, I am a Gothic heroine running away from, like, if I look back, is this hotel going to have magically turned into a crumbling Gothic castle? And do I smell the sea a bit a ways away from it? It was just so funny. I felt like I was in a Gothic novel. I was like, yeah, this definitely was the right dress to wear. So again, a weird, funny story that, yeah, it's just, I love the aesthetic of the Gothic. I love the dark and gloomy and the big haunted house. I love, those, I used to love those novels, the covers of them where, the woman in the flowy dress was running away from the house on the cover, and then she would stop and the cover is like her looking behind
I
her
love those
with the
covers.
moon.
I love
Yep,
those.
you know those
I
covers.
know. I love them. I would reach for that immediately. In the days when we went to the bookstores, I would reach for that because I always wanted to know what's chasing her. But even worse,
Right?
what's in front of her when she turns back. That always.
Yes,
Sometimes I thought to
that's the
myself,
key
well,
question.
you're if there's nothing behind you, lady, turn around and go that way. Because
Yeah.
if you keep coming towards us, you're in trouble. I knew it. I knew it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
speaking of the daughters of Block Island, let's look at that. It was so funny. I loved what the Library Journal said about it. Thrilling psychological suspense that should appeal to fans of Gothic novels and the works of Gemma Amor, Sarah Waters, and the Bronte sisters.
Yeah.
And this got you the Bram Stoker Award. First of all, to get that for your debut novel is magical. But then
Yeah.
again, I read the Bronte sisters, and somehow I never think of the Bronte sisters as Gothic. But
Oh, yeah.
in fact, they are. But for me, I read Bronte sisters. I read Jane Eyre at least twice a year.
Yeah.
Wuthering Heights not quite as often, but Jane Eyre, I practically know it word for word now.
Oh, I love it.
I love it because it's just, oh, it just still gives me a thrill after all these years. Do you remember the first time you read it?
Yes, and I still have it was a gift from my mother. Like, I still have the book that I read it. Like, it's in my bookshelf in the other room. And it's like that cover is just burned into my brain. And I had a daughter 4 years ago, and I went into their basement and was like, I need all your book. My parents saved all of my books. And weirdly, they had some of my chapter books too that, like, I probably should have had. And so as soon as I saw that copy of Jane Eyre, I was like, oh, where is this pen? It's like seeing an old friend. So I have it back now. It's in my bookshelf. And yeah, that blurb that they gave the Bronte sisters, just to have your work compared to them. And then Sarah Waters, like, her book The Little Stranger is just like it's one of my favorite books of all time. It's actually a book that I won't reread, which is weird because I do usually reread things that I love, but it was so just magical. We keep using this word tonight, but there was something about it when I read it, like, it actually scared me a little bit in parts, like, really truly sent people blurb books for authors all the time, and they say things like sent a chill up my spine and made my blood run cold, and this book truly made a chill go up my spine in parts. And I'm like afraid to ruin that magic, and I just want to keep it. I mean, I'm sure I will reread it eventually because I just won't be able to help myself, but I've gone like 10 years without reading it again because the initial experience was just very transcendent.
I think that's going to happen with your book because there is a scene in there that I think you know which one. It's so gripping, and I like. Oh my gosh, how did you? It's just so good. I can't tell people. But what was it
Oh,
like to win the Bram Stoker? How did you get notified? And was there an award ceremony? What happened?
Yeah, I knew that it was chugging along, so to speak, in that somebody told me that there's all different ways that you can get nominated. There's like a jury process, then there's like a recommended reading list, and if it gets a certain number of recommendations, I don't know too much more of the inner workings than that. I know it was on the recommended reading list, and then it was on the preliminary ballot, and I was like, oh, this is very exciting, but I certainly did not have any expectations. And then when it was nominated, utterly thrilled. And the other authors that were in the category with me were just amazing authors with absolutely killer debut novels. And I had, again, zero expectations. And I almost, the Horror Writers Association, the wonderful person, Brian Matthews, who oversees the awards and helps organize everything, he always makes a big stink about everybody has to write a speech even if they don't think they're going to win, because he says, I can't tell you how many times over the years somebody that was sure they weren't going to win was up on the stage stuttering and blubbering and mad at themselves that they hadn't written a speech. And me being apparently a big jackass, I was like still not going to write a speech because I was like, there's no way. And then at the last minute, the night before, I was like, I'll write a speech just in case. So if I did win, Brian wasn't mad at me and holding me up as an example for future. So I wrote the speech, and then when they ever called my name, I think I blacked out. And luckily, I was sitting next to a very dear friend who gave me a little hug and nudged me and made me come out of my blackout.
So where did this take place? What?
It was in San Diego this past year. It takes place at the StokerCon convention every year, and each year it's in a different it's at the convention every year, but the convention takes place at a different city. So it was in San Diego this past year, and it will be in Stamford, Connecticut this year.
You had to be pinched to
Yes,
get
truly.
really. But that's not the only award. Then you were a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Awards, and she is, people call her the literary sorceress. That was also an exciting moment because that's a very prestigious award to get, or to even to be a finalist for.
Yeah, again, still speechless. And she is one of my all-time favorite writers. I mean, my daughter is named Eleanor after her protagonist in The Haunting of Hill House. I am like mega fan. I read We've Always Lived in the Castle. If you say you read Jane Eyre twice a year, I read that twice a year. The Haunting of Hill House I just love. I've read her, what is it, Ruth? I'm gonna blank on the name. Ruth something wrote an absolutely unbelievable biography about her, and it is just so rich with details. And I've read that twice. I just adore her. Gosh, of course, I want to keep writing, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to have this book come out after my debut and the book next year. And if I get to keep writing and keep publishing, it's just an absolute dream. But if I never got to publish another thing again and I still get to say Shirley Jackson Award finalist next to the book that I wrote, it
It is,
absolutely
and
does not
she's,
feel real.
that is an amazing book. But also, she wrote the short story "The Lottery," which was really what
Yes.
which was great. And I love short stories. And for the past, since I started my radio program 9.5 years ago, I've been encouraging people to do NaNoWriMo that they can push themselves. For people who, they'll say, I don't know if I can write. And I say, do NaNoWriMo, try it. And they often
Yeah,
ask me, what should I do? I tell them, get in the habit of reading short stories because I love short stories.
me
And
too.
The Lottery is, oh, that's a great short story. My
Oh,
gosh.
yes. Like one of the absolute best. And I can't even count how many times I've read that one. It's just, yeah, she's unparalleled with the work that she produced during her too short life.
You also like to write short stories.
I do. For years, that was all I wrote. I was convinced that I couldn't write novels for about, gosh, 6 years. I was still writing novels in the background. Daughters of Black Island is not the first novel I wrote, but I was, yeah, definitely very much more confident in my short story writing ability, to the point where I put out a short story collection back in 2018 with a small independent publisher. But yeah, I wrote a lot of short fiction and I don't get to do it. It's weird. It's hard to, if you're going to try to publish a book a year, a novel a year, it's hard to also write short fiction
Well, it's
time
funny,
wise.
really. Writing a novel is actually easier than writing a short story. So, by starting with short stories, you really honed your craft because with a short story, you have to do it all in such a very quickly and very, you have to really think about every single word you put in that short story. Whereas in a novel,
Yeah,
you can
you're
have a
right.
lot of words or a lot of pages where you don't necessarily say something, you know, that important. But boy,
Right.
when
Yeah,
you're
you have time to breathe in a novel. In the
yeah,
short
yeah,
story, you
you can
gotta
throw it. You
get
can
it right.
yeah, you can throw in a lot of other stuff that you want. But boy, in a short story, you have to be really good, and your short stories are great. And that's in what's the name of it?
Borrowed
Yeah,
something blood soaked.
yeah, something that's a great title too. So,
There
but
were a lot of like marriage horror inspired stories in it, so it felt like a good title.
it is it, and I've read some of them. I didn't get to read all of them, but boy, oh boy, again, that book is great, and you can
Oh,
see
thank
your
you.
that you really know how to use words, and that's so important. And of course, when you're going to deal with Edgar Allan Poe, you better know how to.
You can't take him on and not at least do your best to do him
That's
justice.
right. Were you reading Poe at an early age too?
I actually don't think I read Poe before high school. I think there was a lot of authors I found early on my own, and I don't like I mentioned the treasure trove of books that my parents held back for me, and I there were all sorts of titles in there, and I did not have, at least maybe I did, maybe I took stuff out of the library and just don't remember. But yeah, I didn't have any of his books in my possession, but I do remember the first time when I read The Mask of the Red Death in high school, I was like instantly, oh, this is my most favorite thing ever. Who is this man and where can I read more of what he wrote? And I think The Mask of the Red Death is probably still my favorite Poe story.
I think you've captured his essence, and certainly it's just so wonderful to see a writer get to this level and so fast. This is your second book out, and it's already being acclaimed. And I know that the third book will be. And this is just, isn't it fun to be an author? You have
Oh, yes.
all these people in your head as you write. The more you write, and the more you do research, all of these people just get into your head.
It's so true. It's like this crazy addiction in a way. This third book was really difficult for me to write, just not in any sort of meaningful metaphoric way. It just plot wise, it just gave me a lot of trouble. I kept having to rewrite stuff. There was a lot more just it was more like The Daughters of Black Island in that it's a little bit twisty turny. For all of the mystery and suspense that I do feel is in Poet's House, it does have more of a sort of linear structure to it. I guess there's a little bit of like back and forthy kind of things, but this third book just really was like a bit torturous for me, like really testing me as to whether I could make it work. And ultimately, I was very happy that it all came together in the end, thank goodness. But it was mentally exhausting to have worked on this book. And I'm like making my way through the editing process. Still have some edits to do. Went through with one of my editors already. But it's funny because throughout writing it and gearing up toward editing, I kept telling myself, "Oh my God, this book almost killed me. I'm exhausted. I need a nice long break. I need a break. I need to relax." And all I can do is think about the next book that I want to write. I already have my so-called break, my rest. I'm like already reading books to I haven't started writing anything yet. I haven't started jotting little those are the when I start jotting actual little notes to myself, that's when it's very imminent that the writing process is going to start again. But it has definitely still been kickstarted because I've been reading. So it does have another little connection to something in the past. And it's so early on that I'm not even going to say what it is.
Okay.
Um, but I started reading and immersing myself in the lives of a couple women in the late 1700s and early 1800s. So
You're teasing us. We have something to
I
look
know.
forward to. We have something to look forward to. I want to thank you so much for being on Joy on Paper Live. This is so much fun. As I said, I was on the radio almost 10 years now, but and I've been doing this for not that long, the YouTube. It's wonderful because I get to see people and I get to show them the covers, and so that they really can identify and get to know you, because you're fascinating. And I think that you're going to be. One thing I want to say, there are some scenes in Beneath the Poet's House. Well, I'm sure people already talk about how cinematic it is, and but there are a few scary scenes in there that I want to see it on film because they are great.
That would be lovely. It would be very cool.
When you get a movie deal, when they option it, you have to come back and tell us about it, okay?
You got yourself a deal.
Okay, good. I know it's going to come true because I remember when Jojo Moyes was on my program years ago, and the minute I read the book, I was like 8 pages into that book, I think, and I said, okay, this is going to be a film. And that was long before anybody was talking about it. So, yeah, I know this is going to be a film too.
I love you put it out into the world, and hopefully it will manifest, and I love it. I will take that and run with that energy.
Okay, meanwhile, you have a simple website, Christa Carmen, and I'm sure you're all social media. What social media do you like?
I'm mostly Facebook and Instagram. I'm still on Twitter, but it's not great over there, and on Blue Sky as well, but mostly Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
And it's just Christa Carmen. You can, I'm trying to think, my handle is Christa QUA, Christa Qua on Instagram, but if you search Christa Carmen, you can find me.
Okay. Again, Christa, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a joy to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me and for all of your lovely questions and kind words. And yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye. If you like spooky, then you will like Christa Carmen. Her writing is spooky, and let's just say shades of Stephen King. And an author who comes out with a clever idea really impresses me, and certainly Christa impresses me. So get this book, Beneath the Poet's House, and it's exciting and beautifully written. Wonderful book to read during a nice cold, spooky evening. Sit in your favorite chair and cover yourself with a blankie and just read this book. Meanwhile, please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live so that I can bring you more interviews with interesting authors who I hope will inspire you. So get out there and find the joy, because remember, life is fun. Turn the house down.